In America, justice wears a blindfold, but somehow it still knows the color of your skin. For every courtroom drama we watch on TV, there are 100 real stories that never reach a jury. Stories where guilt comes first, evidence second. Where race decides reality long before the verdict ever does. This is one of those stories. Darius Walker was just 15. A quiet, book-smart black kid from Gadsden, Michigan. One cold October morning, a white police officer was shot and killed near an alley 2 blocks from Darius's school. 30 minutes later, Darius was in handcuffs. No weapon, no prints, no eyewitnesses who could agree. Just a scared teenager and a system that needed someone to blame. The media called him a cop killer. The prosecutor called it justice. The people called it closure. And then someone else came back. Marcus Hale, a black defense attorney from Detroit who had left Gadsden behind years ago, returned, not to visit, but to fight. He knew what it meant to be labeled dangerous for being smart. He knew what it felt like to be outnumbered in a courtroom, because once he was Darius. This is the story of 2 black men, one accused, one defending, and a legal system designed to break them both. Solving racism doesn't begin with kindness. It begins with confrontation. And the truth is, the courtroom isn't always where justice lives. Sometimes it's where justice goes to die. Darius Walker was the kind of kid teachers quietly hoped their own children would grow up to be like. He wasn't loud. He didn't skip class. He wasn't part of any crew or clique. At 15, he read more than he spoke. Math came easy. Reading even easier. His mother, Clarice, raised him alone. A night shift nurse with iron in her voice and love in her hands. They lived in Gadsden, Michigan, in a 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat on Lawson Street. It was clean, old, and always smelled faintly of bleach. But it was home. On the morning everything changed, Darius left for school with his backpack, a granola bar, and a library book tucked under his arm. He never made it to second period. At 8:42 a.m., shots were heard in the alley behind Monroe Hardware. 2 blocks from Darius's high school, a white police officer, Matthew Keene, was found dead with 2 bullets in his chest. His body camera was off. No eyewitnesses saw who pulled the trigger. But by 9:15 a.m., Darius Walker was in the back of a squad car. A store camera near the alley showed a young black male in a hoodie moving quickly out of frame around the time of the shooting. That was enough. Police cornered him outside the school gym. No warrant, no questions, just hands on the wall. His face hit the bricks. His knees scraped the pavement. He was searched, cuffed, and shoved into the cruiser before anyone could say a word. His mother didn't find out until lunch break, when the school called to report her son had been involved in an incident. Darius sat alone in the cold room at Gadsden PD. The table was steel. The walls were gray. The clock ticked loud, as if time itself was interrogating him. He asked for a lawyer. They said one was being arranged. What he didn't know, the town had already made up its mind. The local news station ran with the headline by noon. Breaking, officer killed, local teen in custody. They didn't say he was a suspect. They didn't have to. By 2:00 p.m., his photo, a cropped yearbook headshot, was on every screen in town. Black kid, hoodie, no context, just fear. Meanwhile, 120 miles away in Detroit, Marcus Hale was driving north on I-75. The call came from his sister, Clarice's best friend. "Your hometown's making headlines again," she said, "and not the good kind." Marcus had left Gadsden nearly 2 decades earlier. He'd gone to law school, made a name for himself as a sharp, relentless defense attorney with a gift for exposing bias in the courtroom. He rarely looked back. The town reminded him of things he'd worked too hard to forget, including the courtroom where, at 17, he'd once stood as a defendant himself. But this wasn't about him. This was about a boy, a kid who reminded him of himself. The kind the system eats alive, slow, cold, and legal. He cancelled his appointments, rerouted everything. He was going home. Marcus arrived in Gadsden just after sunset. He wore a fitted navy blue suit, black coat, and the same steel stare that had made prosecutors in Wayne County flinch. But Gadsden wasn't Wayne County. This was a town where power wore a uniform, and where a black man in a suit still raised suspicion, especially if he asked too many questions. He walked into the station and introduced himself. The front desk officer, young, pale, nervous, blinked twice before saying Darius was in holding. "No, he hasn't been arraigned yet," the officer added. "No, we don't have the full report." Marcus knew the game. Delay, confuse, intimidate. But he'd played it before. That night, he sat across the glass from Darius. The boy looked stunned, pale, barely breathing through the weight of it all. Marcus didn't ask what happened. He asked who was trying to make it happen, because when a black boy is accused of killing a white cop, it's rarely about facts. It's about control. The judge scheduled the preliminary hearing for Monday morning. A case involving a dead police officer wouldn't be allowed to wait. Marcus Hale wasn't surprised. He knew courts in towns like Gadsden weren't temples of justice. They were conveyor belts. If you were black, poor, and quiet, they'd already boxed you up. All that was left was to seal the lid. He filed a motion requesting all materials related to the case. In response, he received 6 pages and a grainy CCTV screenshot, a blurry image of a figure in a hoodie jogging out of frame. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no weapon. But they had fear and grief, and a white cop lying dead in the street. That was enough. The prosecutor was Daniel Covington, a sharp, polished white man in his 40s, with a calculated voice, trimmed beard, and political ambition baked into his posture. He had already run for district judge twice and had every intention to run again. A case involving a cop killer. Perfect stage for a campaign built on being tough on crime. He didn't smile in court. He didn't ask questions in good faith. He wasn't looking for facts. He was looking for a conviction, and Marcus Hale was in his way. During the pre-trial hearing, Covington stood before the judge with a smirk barely hiding beneath his voice and said, "Your Honor, with all due respect, I believe Mr. Hale isn't defending this young man because he thinks he's innocent. He's defending him because they're both black." The courtroom went still. Even the judge blinked in discomfort. Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't rise. He stared straight at Covington, held the gaze, and slowly sat back down. Because the courtroom wasn't a debate stage. It was a battlefield, and silence, used right, could cut deeper than outrage. Marcus filed a motion to challenge the jury selection. Out of 12 jurors, 11 were white. He pointed to the town's demographics, argued for fair representation, cited studies and precedents. The judge denied it. Outside the courthouse, the narrative was already running wild. The local news described the officer as a hero and Darius as a troubled youth. One TV commentator said, "He won't speak because he knows he's guilty." No one questioned the missing body cam footage. No one asked why the weapon was never recovered. No one cared that Darius had no prior record. That night, Marcus sat alone in his motel room. Cheap sheets, flickering desk lamp, court transcripts sprawled across the bed. This wasn't about justice, it was about ritual. White victim, black suspect, and a town craving closure. He thought about his first trial, defending a teenage boy accused of attempted robbery for reaching into his pocket near a white man. The jury convicted him for intent. This was the same story, only this time with a gun and a dead officer. But Marcus wasn't going to fold. Not now, because he wasn't just a lawyer. He was the last wall between a boy and a legal system that had already labeled him a monster. He opened his laptop, drafted motions, pulled case law, highlighted inconsistencies. He knew that facts wouldn't save Darius. Pressure might. And when the sun rose, Marcus was already standing at the courthouse steps. Opening statements began on a Monday morning under gray skies. The courtroom was full. Reporters sat shoulder to shoulder. Darius sat silent beside Marcus, hands in his lap, eyes down. Every camera in town pointed at the table where a 15-year-old was being tried for the murder of a white police officer, without a single piece of physical evidence. But in Gadsden, the trial had started long before the jury was sworn in. This was theater, and everyone already had their roles. Prosecutor Covington spoke first. His voice was calm but loaded with implication. He didn't mention evidence. He mentioned fear. He called Darius aggressive, uncooperative, a young man with possible gang affiliations. There was no record of that. No proof, but no one objected. When it was Marcus's turn, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't try to impress. He simply walked to the center of the courtroom, placed both hands on the table and said, "My client is not on trial because he shot a man. He's on trial because he fit the story they wanted to tell." Some jurors shifted in their seats. The trial moved fast. The detective who arrested Darius couldn't explain why the boy was taken in without a warrant. He fumbled when asked about protocol, admitted the search was based on instinct. There were no fingerprints. The gun was never recovered. No one saw Darius with the officer. But then came the Crown witness, a man named Jerome Fielding, introduced as a community informant. Fielding, a white man in his 50s with multiple prior arrests, testified that he had seen someone run from the alley the day of the shooting. He wasn't sure at first, but over time he claimed he was pretty confident it was the boy. Marcus asked if Fielding had received anything in exchange for his cooperation. Fielding said no. Marcus revealed a copy of a traffic ticket dismissed 2 weeks prior, signed off by the Gadsden PD. Coincidence? The jury looked confused. Covington looked irritated. The judge instructed the jury to disregard the implication of motive. Marcus didn't flinch. He had planted the seed. Now it was time to water it. Each day, Marcus watched Darius become quieter. The boy hardly spoke. He just sat still, like something inside him was trying to disappear. In court, Marcus made sure Darius was always dressed sharply. Tie, button up, hair trimmed, not because appearance changed truth, but because the system only saw what it wanted to see. Marcus knew the game. You didn't win by shouting. You won by being unshakable. Midway through the trial, Marcus introduced a new witness, the teacher from Darius's school who said Darius was in her classroom minutes before the shooting. Covington objected. The judge allowed it, but warned Marcus not to turn this into a social commentary. That phrase stuck in Marcus's head, not a social commentary, as if a black boy on trial for his life in a white town wasn't already a commentary in itself. That night, Marcus stood in the motel parking lot, staring at the sky. He thought of his father, of the boys he defended and the ones the system swallowed whole. He thought of the jurors, of their silence, their stolen glances, their tightening jaws every time the word truth was spoken. He didn't need a miracle. He needed one crack in the wall. And he was close. It started with a receipt. A crumpled gas station receipt, time-stamped just 9 minutes before the officer's shooting, found in the side pocket of Darius's backpack. It hadn't been logged into evidence. It hadn't even been listed on the inventory sheet. Marcus found it during a late-night review, sifting through personal items returned by the police department. The receipt placed Darius nearly a mile away from the scene at the time of the shooting, but no one had mentioned it, because no one wanted it mentioned. Marcus filed a motion immediately. The judge hesitated. The prosecution objected, citing irrelevance and chain of custody concerns. Marcus held the receipt up in court. If a boy says he was getting snacks, and his receipt says the same, how do you call that irrelevant? The judge allowed it. The jurors looked at one another. Finally, something that made sense. something that wasn't speculation or assumption. Covington shifted tactics. Now the prosecution wasn't saying Darius pulled the trigger. They were saying he helped someone else do it. Accomplice theory. Marcus knew what was happening. They were moving the goalposts because the original narrative was crumbling. The next crack came from inside the system. A rookie officer, no more than 24, sent Marcus an unsigned letter through an anonymous account. Typed, carefully worded, no names, but it was clear. He had seen body cam footage that night. Footage showing another suspect near the alley, someone taller, someone older. The footage had disappeared. Marcus read the letter 3 times, then once more in silence. He didn't trust easily, but he knew cover-ups when he saw them. He subpoenaed internal records, filed formal requests. The department stalled, so he went public. Marcus called a press conference outside the courthouse. He didn't shout, he didn't rage. He held the letter in one hand and the receipt in the other and said, "Justice can't exist in shadows. If the system loses evidence that proves a child's innocence, it's not just broken, it's guilty." That line made the evening news. Twitter took notice. Local teachers posted "Nashar stand with Darius." A criminal justice blog published a piece titled, "When prosecutors lose the narrative, they move the goal." Protesters gathered in front of City Hall the next morning. Not thousands, but dozens. That was enough. Inside the courtroom, Covington doubled down. He called Darius slippery, deceptive, a symbol of the culture of silence. Marcus objected. The judge overruled. Covington paced before the jury and told them, "This isn't just about one boy. This is about safety, about law and order." But Marcus knew what it was about. Fear and the need to make a symbol out of someone defenseless. In cross-examination, Marcus kept his questions simple. He asked the department IT supervisor, "Is it possible for body cam footage to disappear accidentally?" The man hesitated. "Technically, yes, but not likely." "Has it ever happened before in this department?" The silence was long and loud. Marcus rested his case. He wasn't confident, but he was clear. Darius hadn't just been accused, he'd been offered up, because somebody had to be. That night, Marcus walked Darius's mother to her car. Clarice was tired, hollowed out, but her voice remained steady. "I know they see a criminal when they look at my baby," she said, "but I still see a kid who asks me if I want tea before bed." Marcus didn't answer. He couldn't. He was too busy thinking how often the law mistook love for weakness and silence for guilt. The jury began deliberations on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Marcus watched them file out, each face holding the weight of the town behind it. 11 white jurors, 1 black woman, mid-50s, quiet, observant. He had no idea what that meant. In trials like this, assumptions were dangerous. Hope was a risky thing to carry. Outside, the protest had grown. Teachers, pastors, 3 retired journalists from Detroit. One held a sign that read, "Protect the truth, not the badge." Inside, Darius sat like stone, his hands folded, his eyes lost in a corner of the room. He hadn't spoken much in days. He didn't cry, didn't shake. It wasn't calm, it was resignation. He knew what they saw when they looked at him. The jury stayed out for 4 hours, then 5. At hour 6, word came. They were ready. Marcus stood, buttoned his suit, and exhaled so slowly it felt like breaking. Darius stood beside him, small, still. The room filled as the bailiff called the court to order. The judge looked down over the glasses perched on his nose. The foreperson, a man with broad shoulders and a stiff jaw, stood and read the verdict. On the charge of first-degree murder of Officer Matthew Keene, we find the defendant, Darius Walker, not guilty. There was no gasp, just a pause, and then breath, collective. shaking and almost unbelieving. The second charge followed. On the charge of aiding and abetting in the same crime, we find the defendant not guilty. Darius blinked once, then again. He didn't move. It was Clarice, his mother, who let out a sound somewhere between a cry and a prayer. Marcus closed his eyes. It wasn't victory. It was survival. Outside the courthouse, the air had shifted. Reporters shouted questions. Clarice held Darius close, his head pressed to her shoulder. Marcus stood beside them, silent, eyes scanning the crowd like he still didn't believe it was real. The sheriff's department issued no comment. Prosecutor Covington released a one-sentence statement. "We respect the court's decision, though we disagree." That night, Marcus didn't celebrate. He sat in his motel, lights off, suit jacket still on, because he knew what tomorrow would bring. Darius would go home, but not the same. There would be whispers, doubt, the kind of damage that doesn't leave bruises, only distance. And Marcus? He'd leave too. He didn't belong here. But he had done what he came to do. He didn't win. He prevented a loss. 3 weeks later, Darius walked into his school for the first time since the trial. No cameras, no crowds, just hallways that suddenly felt longer and quieter. Some kids nodded at him, others looked away. No one said what they were thinking, but he heard it in their footsteps. He felt it in the pauses between conversations. Freedom doesn't always feel free. Clarice returned to her night shifts. She smiled when she had to, but she slept less, and she jumped when the phone rang. They had won, yes, but in places like Gadsden, wins came with small print. You can walk free and still be trapped inside the memory. Marcus returned to Detroit, back to a desk piled with new files, back to a city that bled differently, but bled just the same. He didn't speak to the press. He didn't do interviews. He didn't publish a statement. He wrote one letter, addressed to Darius, typed, signed by hand. They tried to make you a symbol of violence. What you became is a symbol of survival. Don't let them take that from you. Weeks passed. A civil rights group launched a formal complaint into the Gadsden Police Department. The body cam footage was never recovered. The rookie officer who hinted at its existence quietly resigned. Prosecutor Covington announced he was withdrawing from the next election cycle. The story faded from the headlines, but not from the hearts of those who lived it. Marcus sat in his office late one Friday evening, case files closed, phone silent. He looked at the framed quote above his desk. "The law is what we say it is." He had once believed in it, in rules, in systems, in the courtroom as a place where truth and justice met in equal parts. Now, he believed in people, in the boy who didn't run, in the mother who never wavered, in the silence between verdicts that says more than any gavel ever could. He opened his journal. He wrote the title, "Solving Racism, One Case, One Fight, One Truth." And beneath it, one sentence. You don't fix a broken system by trusting it, you fix it by forcing it to see itself. Then he closed the journal and turned off the light.